I'm looking at a technical service bulletin issued by Toyota's North American Engineering Division, and the language inside it is unusually direct for a manufacturer document. It addresses a feature sitting in roughly 9 out of every 10 new vehicles sold in this country right now. The bulletin describes accelerated oil degradation, increased wear metals and used oil analysis, and a recommendation that quietly contradicts what's printed inside your owner's manual. The feature in question is Auto Stop Start, the system that shuts your engine off at every red light to save fuel. And according to the data inside this document, that little convenience may be aging your engine oil up to 3 times faster than normal driving. Most owners have never been told this, most service advisors have never read the bulletin, and the rest of the industry is doing the exact same thing. Now, before anyone tunes this out as another internet rumor, understand what's actually happening under the hood every time that engine cycles. You're not just turning a switch, you're triggering a chain reaction of micro events that engineers have studied for over a decade. And the results keep landing in the same place: higher wear, faster contamination, shorter useful oil life. The component manufacturers know it. The oil chemists know it. The technicians at the dealer know it because they're the ones cutting open filters and watching the metallic glitter pour out at 40,000 miles instead of 80. Here's where it gets interesting. The vehicles most affected are not high-mileage commuter cars on the highway. They're the urban drivers, the school-run minivans, the delivery trucks, the grandparents driving 5 miles to the grocery store and back. The exact people who trust the maintenance schedule the most are the ones whose engines may be aging on a completely different clock. And if you're someone who's been stretching oil changes to 10,000 miles because the dash light hasn't come on yet, you'll want to hear what the engineering team flagged in writing. Let me explain why this matters before we get into the document itself. Engine oil is not a static fluid. It's a chemical cocktail engineered to do 5 jobs at once. It lubricates moving metal so it doesn't grind itself to powder. It carries heat away from combustion. It cleans deposits. And suspends them so the filter can grab them. It seals the tiny gap between piston ring and cylinder wall, and it protects metal surfaces from acid attack between combustion events. Every one of those jobs depends on the oil being able to flow, being able to coat, and being able to maintain a microscopic film of protection between 2 surfaces moving at thousands of feet per minute. When you compromise that film, even briefly, metal touches metal. And metal touching metal is the start of every catastrophic engine failure ever recorded. That's the stake. We're not talking about a slightly noisier engine at 100,000 miles. We're talking about timing chain stretch, cam follower scoring, turbocharger bearing collapse, and in extreme cases, low-speed pre-ignition events that can crack a piston in a single millisecond. These aren't theoretical. These are warranty claims being processed right now on engines that on paper should still be in their break-in period. And the common thread running through them keeps coming back to the same feature on the dash. Pay attention to this number. Industry data shows that on a typical urban commute, with heavy traffic, a stop-start system can cycle the engine on and off between 15 and 40 times in a single 30-minute drive. Multiply that by 2 commutes a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, and you're looking at somewhere between 7 and 20,000 engine restart events per year. The owner's manual was written assuming roughly 0. Let that sink in for a second. The document I'm referencing is a technical service bulletin circulated to authorized Toyota service centers, and the operative language uses phrases like accelerated lubricant deterioration, elevated wear metal concentration in used oil analysis samples, and a recommendation that dealers consider shortened oil change intervals for vehicles operating in high cycle conditions. That last phrase is the one that matters. High cycle conditions is engineering shorthand for a vehicle whose stop-start system is firing constantly, which describes almost every urban-driven Toyota built in the last 7 years. Toyota is not alone here, and that's an important piece of context. Mazda's SkyActiv platform uses the same technology. Ford's EcoBoost line, the GM small block V8s, with active fuel management plus stop-start, the Hyundai Kia Turbo 4s, even the German luxury brands. They all run auto stop-start as a default feature, and they all share the same physics. What makes the Toyota bulletin notable isn't that Toyota engines are worse. It's that Toyota's internal language acknowledges the wear mechanism in writing, where most other manufacturers have stayed silent or buried the issue inside vague service notes about severe duty schedules. So let's actually walk through what happens inside your engine every time that little green leaf icon shuts everything down at a red light. This is where the technical formula starts to matter, because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. The first concept is something engineers call dry start scuffing. Think of your engine like a stack of pancakes with butter between every layer. When the engine is running, an oil pump is constantly pushing pressurized lubricant up through tiny passages to every bearing, every cam lobe, every piston skirt. That pressure builds a hydrodynamic wedge, a microscopically thin layer of oil that physically separates moving metal from stationary metal. When the engine shuts off, that pressure drops to zero in under a second. Gravity pulls most of the oil back down into the pan. What's left behind on the bearing surfaces is only a residual film, sometimes just a few molecules thick. When the starter kicks the engine back over, there's a window of 1 to 3 full revolutions before oil pressure rebuilds enough to reestablish that protective wedge. During that window, the metal surfaces are essentially scraping against each other, lubricated only by whatever clung to the surface in the seconds prior. The real-world consequence is microscopic, but cumulative. Tests indicate that the wear, during a single cold start event, can equal the wear of several hundred miles of steady highway cruising. And why this matters is simple math. If a normal engine sees 1 cold start per drive, a stop-start engine may see 20. Now listen, because here's where it gets uncomfortable. Engineers have known about dry start wear for decades. That's why every modern engine has anti-drainback valves in the oil filter, and why oil formulations include friction modifiers and anti-wear additives like zinc dialkylethiophosphate. The whole supplemental additive package exists to bridge that pressure gap during start events. The assumption in the chemistry was always that a vehicle would experience maybe 2 to 5 cold start events per day, not 40. The additive package gets consumed faster, depleted faster, and the protective film fails faster as those additives drop below their effective concentration. Industry data shows that anti-wear additive depletion in heavy stop-start use can occur at roughly half the mileage that the oil's base stock is still chemically viable. In plain English, the oil might still look amber on the dipstick, but the chemistry protecting your bearings is already on the floor. The second mechanism is low-speed pre-ignition, abbreviated LSPI in the technical literature. This one is specific to modern direct injection turbocharged engines, which is most of what's being sold now. LSPI happens when a tiny droplet of oil or fuel oil mixture ignites inside the combustion chamber before the spark plug fires. Think of it like a kitchen grease fire, starting before you turn on the burner. The pressure spike is enormous, sometimes high enough to crack a piston ring land or punch a hole through the top of the piston itself. Now, what does this have to do with stop-start? Short cycle times. When an engine restarts dozens of times per drive, the combustion chamber temperatures swing wildly. Fuel injection events happen during conditions the engine map was never optimized for. Oil droplets that would normally burn off cleanly at steady state can pool in chamber corners and become ignition seeds during the next start. TSB reports from multiple manufacturers, including Toyota, have flagged LSPI as a known concern in vehicles with frequent stop-start activation, particularly when combined with short trips that never let oil temperature stabilize. Most people don't know this, but the API SP oil specification, the one that became standard in 2020, was created specifically to address LSPI. The previous spec, API SN Plus, was an interim emergency standard rushed out because LSPI-related piston failures were becoming a warranty nightmare across the industry. The ILSAC GF6A rating, which sits alongside API SP on most modern oil bottles, includes a dedicated LSPI test sequence that didn't exist 5 years earlier. The chemistry inside these new oils has been retuned with reduced calcium-based detergents and increased magnesium content, specifically because calcium soaps were identified as LSPI ignition triggers in turbocharged direct injection engines. If you're running an older oil specification in a modern turbocharged engine with stop-start, evidence suggests you may be operating outside the chemistry your engine was designed around. The third mechanism is fuel dilution. Picture your oil pan as a punch bowl. Now imagine someone pouring a small amount of gasoline into it every few minutes. That's essentially what happens during cold starts and short runtime cycles. Direct injection engines spray fuel directly into the combustion chamber, and some of that fuel inevitably washes past the piston rings and ends up in the oil pan. Under normal operating temperature, that fuel evaporates back out and gets pulled through the positive crankcase ventilation system into the intake. But during a stop-start cycle, the engine often shuts off before oil temperature reaches that evaporation threshold. The fuel stays in the oil. Cycle after cycle, the dilution accumulates. Tests indicate that vehicles operating heavy stop-start patterns can show fuel dilution percentages 2 to 3 times higher than vehicles on highway-only duty cycles at the same mileage. Why does fuel dilution matter? Because gasoline doesn't lubricate. It thins the oil, drops its viscosity, weakens that hydrodynamic wedge we talked about earlier, and accelerates oxidation. A 5% fuel dilution can effectively turn a 5W30 oil into something behaving like a 5W20, or worse. The bearings were not designed for that viscosity. The variable valve, timing solenoids were not calibrated for that viscosity. And the turbocharger center cartridge, spinning at over 100,000 RPM and relying on a stable oil wedge to float the shaft, definitely was not designed for that viscosity. Wait until you hear what the technician said when I walked through this with a master certified tech who's been working Toyota dealerships for 19 years. He told me he can predict, just by looking at the VIN history and the customer's commute pattern, which engines coming in for their 40,000 mile service will have measurable wear metal numbers in the used oil sample. He pulls the dipstick and tells me to feel it. Gritty residue, a subtle, almost sandy texture rolling between thumb and finger that shouldn't be there on a 30,000 mile vehicle. He shows me a filler cap from a stop-start commuter. There's a thin band of varnish, a brownish amber coating clinging to the inside of the cap, sticky to the touch. That varnish is the signature of oxidized oil, the chemistry breaking down ahead of schedule. He pops the valve cover on a customer's car that was in for a separate issue. Black sludge in the corners, the smell of burning oil. Through the vents on the way back from the test drive. 41,000 miles. Should have been pristine. The fourth mechanism, and this one ties everything together, is viscosity shear down. Modern engine oils achieve their multi-grade rating, that 0W20 or 5W30 on the bottle, through polymer additives called viscosity index improvers. These are long-chain molecules that coil up when cold and uncoil when hot, keeping the oil's viscosity stable across temperature extremes. The problem is that these polymers are mechanically fragile. Every time oil gets squeezed through a tight bearing clearance or sheared between two gear teeth, some percentage of those polymer chains physically break. Once broken, they can't be repaired. The oil's high temperature viscosity permanently drops. Stop-start cycles, with their repeated pressure surges and turbocharger spool events, accelerate the shearing process. Industry data shows that viscosity shear down in heavy stop-start use can push an oil out of grade well before the recommended change interval. In plain terms, your 5W30 may be performing like a 5W20 by 5,000 miles and like straight 20 weight by 10,000. And that's not even the worst part. The thinner the oil gets, the less it protects, the more wear it generates, and the more wear metals it carries, which themselves act as abrasive particles accelerating the cycle further. So now let's put numbers to this. The TSB language references used oil analysis results where iron content, copper content, and aluminum content all trended significantly higher than baseline in vehicles with documented heavy stop-start activation. Iron tells you about cylinder walls, piston rings, and camshafts. Copper points to bearings. Aluminum points to pistons. In normal driving, an engine at 40,000 miles might show single-digit parts per million on those metals in a fresh oil sample. Some owners report numbers in the 20s and 30s on stop-start commuter vehicles at the same mileage, with the same maintenance schedule, on the same oil specification. Bob is the oil guy forum has independent used oil. Analysis data going back over a decade from real-world owners. Cross-referencing those reports with stop-start vehicle reports shows a consistent pattern. Higher wear metals, faster TBN depletion, which is the oil's reserve alkalinity for neutralizing acids, earlier oxidation onset. The trend is not subtle and it appears across manufacturers, not just Toyota. Mazda forums, Ford EcoBoost forums, Hyundai forums, all showing the same general pattern when stop-start use is high. This part will make you check your own car this weekend. The federal fuel economy benefit of stop-start, according to EPA testing, is roughly 2 to 4%. That's the entire reason this feature exists on your vehicle. 2 to 4% fuel savings in exchange for what the data suggests may be a meaningful reduction in oil service life and possibly engine longevity. The cost-benefit math gets very interesting when you run it out over a vehicle's lifetime. Now, in fairness to the manufacturers, here's how Toyota and the rest of the industry frame this. The engineering position is that modern engines, modern oils, and modern starter systems are all jointly designed to handle stop-start cycling without measurable long-term harm. The starters used in stop-start vehicles are heavy-duty units, often pinion-engaged designs rated for 200,000 cycles or more. The bearings have updated surface treatments. The oils carrying the API SP and ILSAC GF6A ratings include enhanced additive packages specifically tested for high cycle operation. From Toyota's published position, the system is robust, the wear is within acceptable engineering tolerances, and the fuel and emissions benefits justify the design. That's a fair summary of the manufacturer's official stance, and it's not unreasonable on its face. But here's the contradiction sitting inside their own bulletin. The same document that defends the system's reliability also recommends shortened service intervals under certain operating conditions. It uses the phrase severe service to describe driving patterns that include frequent short trips, frequent idling, and heavy stop-start activation. And the severe service maintenance schedule, buried at the back of your owner's manual where most people never look, often calls for oil changes at half the mileage of the normal schedule. 5,000 miles instead of 10, sometimes less. The manufacturer is acknowledging, in writing, that the conditions created by their own feature qualify as severe service. They're just not advertising it on the window sticker. Independent fleet operators figured this out years ago. rideshare drivers, delivery fleets, taxi operators. The people running these vehicles 7 days a week have settled on dramatically shorter oil change intervals than the manuals call for. 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles, synthetic oil every 5,000 maximum. They learned it the hard way by watching engines that should have lasted 300,000 miles fail at 150. And the common factor in every fleet study published in the last 5 years is stop-start cycling combined with extended drain intervals. So what do you actually do about this? Here's the conditional advice, the part you can act on this week. If your vehicle has an auto stop-start system, and most vehicles built after 2018 do, the first action is to look at how you actually drive. If your typical commute involves heavy traffic, multiple stoplights, frequent idling, or short trips under 15 minutes where the engine never fully reaches operating temperature, you fall into the high cycle category. If that describes you, evidence suggests cutting your oil change interval in half compared to the normal schedule may significantly reduce wear accumulation. Not the maximum interval the dash reminder uses, the severe service interval listed in the back of your owner's manual. If you don't have access to your manual, a safe default for high cycle stop-start driving is 5,000 miles on full, synthetic oil meeting the API SP and ILSAC GF6A specifications. Both ratings must be present on the bottle. Skip the bargain brand house oils that meet only older specifications. The chemistry difference matters for stop-start protection. The second action is to consider whether you actually need the stop-start function active on every drive. Many vehicles include a defeat button, usually marked with a small A, inside a circular arrow that lets you disable the system for that drive cycle. Some owners disable it routinely, accepting the small fuel economy hit in exchange for reduced cycling. Aftermarket modules exist that remember the setting between starts. Whether to use them is a personal decision, but the option exists, and it's worth knowing about. The third action is an annual used oil analysis. For $25 to $40 per sample through services like Blackstone Labs, you can get an exact readout of wear metals, fuel dilution, viscosity, and additive depletion in your engine's actual oil. One sample tells you more about your engine's real condition than any dashboard light ever will. If the wear metals trend high, you'll know it before damage compounds. If everything looks clean, you'll have peace of mind backed by data instead of marketing. The fourth action, and the simplest of all, is the inspection you can do in your own driveway this weekend. Pop the oil filler cap. Look inside. Feel the underside of the cap with your fingertip. If you see thick brown varnish, sticky residue, or any milky discoloration, your oil is telling you something. Pull the dipstick. The oil should be amber to light brown, fluid, with no gritty texture when you rub it between your fingers. Black, thick, gritty, or chemical-smelling oil at low mileage is a warning sign worth investigating. None of this requires tools. None of it requires a lift. 10 minutes in the garage on a Saturday morning can tell you more than the next 3 dashboard reminders combined. Seriously, check your vehicle this weekend. If you drive in heavy traffic, if your commute is short, if you've been trusting the dashboard oil life monitor without ever pulling the dipstick yourself, this is the weekend to start. Get under the hood. Smell the oil. Feel the residue. If something looks wrong, get a sample analyzed before the next change. And if you know someone in your life driving a newer Toyota, Mazda, Ford, GM, Hyundai, or pretty much anything built in the last 7 years with that little A arrow icon on the dash, send them this video. Their engine may be aging on a clock they don't know about, on a maintenance schedule that was never built for how they actually drive. Subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up where we break down exactly which oil brands passed and failed the latest independent stop-start endurance testing, including a few household names that did surprisingly poorly. Take care of your engine, take care of your wallet, and take care of the people you drive with. Stay safe out there and stay sharp. Warning.